Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Play20. Im Moment rede ich zwar noch Deutsch, aber wir gehen gleich auf Englisch nochmal rüber. Und zwar haben wir einen Gast. So, welcome Paolo Pedercini. So glad to have you here. If you as an audience want to ask some questions to Paolo, you can do that via YouTube. And after the presentation, we ask them. And yes, so I think if you want to join the chat, you go to channel 2 of the Play Festival and just ask them in the YouTube comment section. So Paolo, stage is yours.
All right. Thank you. All right, so this is me. And I guess here you can put a full screen. So yeah, my name is Paolo Pedercini. Nice to meet you all. And so most of my work is actually released under the project name Molleindustria, which means soft industry or soft factory in Italian. And it's a personal project, but sometimes I collaborate, and it's mostly a bunch of games. Started as a Flash games thing, but now I'm using all sort of tools. And it's about the intersection of this and that, you know, like Molleindustria is about the intersection of ideology and electronic entertainment. Since 2003, I made like 40 games and projects, and you see most of them here in a roughly chronological order. They range from agitprop vignettes about labor, gender, politics, environmentalism, the satirical management games about the McDonald's industry, the fast food industry, this one about the oil industry, and they are all like political, satirical games. There are like abstract playable theories, and this is more like a poem, an interactive poem. There are this existentialist game about alienation called Every Day the Same Dream. I made a game about a day in the life of a drone pilot and things like that. So this is actually not what I'm going to talk about today, because usually I talk about all these games and the ideas behind them, but you can definitely find those talks online. Today I'm going to talk about something more at the frontier, at the boundaries, at the, like, you know, consistently with the theme of the festival. And specifically, I'm going to talk about games without players. And it's not just as a thought experiment, not just like as an abstract idea, but almost as a material necessity, as a possible way to deal with the contradictions of the attention economy. So in the last 10 years, we have witnessed a democratization of the means of production of video games, the indie revolution, or you know, like the digital distribution revolution. Anybody can make games now, thanks to tools, communities, and attitudes, and also it's also mindset. And it's also related, obviously, to the opening of digital distribution channels like Steam or, you know, PlayStation Network and things like that. You don't need to print your games and put them in a store. You can now, in a few clicks, distribute your games to a wide audience. And this is also happening because the most successful internet companies don't make money by selling content or selling services or commodities, but by distributing them. This is like the platform capitalist idea, by controlling a marketplace. So they are fine with many people making games. But obviously, when we democratize the means of production and distribution, we should expect a proliferation of cultural producers and cultural products, in our case, of like many games. And so in the last 5 years, people have been talking about the Indiepocalypse in games, which is a phenomenon that is usually related to the seemingly exponential increase in the number of releases, especially like when you're looking at like the number of games released on Steam. They've been almost exponential until maybe the last year. It seems that maybe we peaked, but it's still like major compared to the early days of digital distribution, that are like the early days of the independent thing sort of emerging. And that comes with a decreasing sales and revenues, even when you take into account, you know, the quality of a game, like, you know, the critical acclaim and the reviews. It seems that there are more games and making less money. And it seems that it becomes a winner-take-all distribution of sales and times. There are some games that are absorbing all the time and all the sales, and many other games that just don't break even and don't get enough attention. And we can argue about each of the statistics, and we can argue about whether having quote unquote too many games is good or bad. I think it's generally good, but regardless, I believe there is, like, regardless of what like the details are, I think there is an inherent tension, which I call a crisis of overproduction. Because games need to be played, and playing takes time. And our time, our attention is a scarce resource. It's contended by many industries, social media, online television, streaming, and our employers, and so on. So if you're looking at the distribution of free time that we have and the way we spend it, it didn't really change that much in the last 15 years, at least in the United States. In the United States, there is they have a system to regularly track free time over every year. The amount of time spent playing games increased a little bit, but not too much. It's not like a staggering amount or staggering shift between, from TV to video games. It's not quite that. A couple of years ago, I gave a talk about all the possible and impossible ways to continue making games in this crisis of attention. You can find it online. It's titled Indiepocalypse now. And some of the solutions I outlined were finding new audiences, having, like over 50, over 60 people playing games, making games specifically for this kind of audiences that are underexplored and underused. Both humans and non-humans, what it means to make games for, animals and plants. One other solution is to demand free time, to liberate more free time, or making games that colonize new spaces and contexts in our lives, not just games for when you're sitting down in front of a screen, but maybe, or when you have a phone in your hand, but maybe there are other ways, other spaces that you can make games for. So, and there is also like another, obviously, angle that is about decommodifying games, essentially founding certain games as public goods, so they don't need to find large paying audiences. They can exist and be sustainable and be, a common good that everybody enjoys without, having to deal with finding a certain number of people to justify the production costs. But there's another approach that involves, I think, rethinking not only what games are, but also what their place and purpose is in our life. And it's the concept of games without players, or the idea of partially or gradually decoupling, like separating games from this extremely competitive attention economy. This process, I'm arguing this process is already happening. It's already happening organically. When you think about esports, or when you think about you don't have to be a committed player to be part of the gaming community. Speedrunners, YouTube streamers, Twitch streamers, millions of people are consuming games vicariously and passively already. And maybe you can do that while you're doing other things. Maybe the streaming is in another tab or another screen, and it's kind of like a second screen experience. And I think game spectatorship fits in a more fragmented attention better than being, totally immersed in a game. It's just easier to sort of like pay half attention to somebody playing, a mobile game rather than actually investing hours into getting much better at playing that. And another indicator was the sudden popularity of Farmville and many social games that kind of run in the background. If you remember, the good old days of Farmville, it's something that you're always kind of constantly playing, and you occasionally just check back and do some minor adjustment, and then you wait for your crop to mature or whatever. Or Neko Atsune, which is a virtual pet collector that you have to check now and then. and kind of like do some maintenance, add some new perks and stuff. So it's more of a pleasant compulsion than a game in the traditional sense. And it kind of mirrors the social media compulsion of like checking occasionally. Farmville might not be that popular anymore, but many top-selling games on mobile, more like casual games, are kind of similar to that. They are clicker games, are also known as idle games or incremental games. In games like Cookie Clicker, you're sort of progressing with very little action. You can keep them, running at work or even while you're playing other games. Clicker games started as a parody of Farmville. The genre kind of like started as almost like a meta joke on the kind of like the leveling, the mindless leveling of this kind of games. Cow Clicker was a minimalist distillation of all the addicting Facebook games circa 2010. But people really got into it, even if it was kind of like a joke. And Universal Paperclips still like this is a more recent contemporary clicker or progress game. It's still like satirical, but still is quite addictive as well. Most of idle games are not really jokes, and they are not satirical. They are an established genre. The precursor of all idle games, arguably, was this one called Progress Quest. Which satirized the whole like leveling and grinding in RPG games. This one doesn't even require clicks. It's just, you just run it and it plays itself. You're sort of like, most of the action is happening here in the bar. It's kind of like a boring Windows, standard Windows interface, and you can sort of like scroll around. But basically what happens is just, it's the skeleton, the mechanics and the stats of your RPG heroes, slaughtering goblins or whatever, and collecting loot and increasing its values. So this is like a game that doesn't require any player or any interaction, really. And it's a zero-player game or a self-playing game. And that's a kind of like a category of games without players. It's not all of them are zero-player games, but they are sort of connected to me in my mind. So self-playing games have actually always been quite popular in the art world. If you want to put a game in a museum, or if you want to make art with games or games or games engines, it kind of helps if they are not interactive. In a way, a game that plays itself looks slightly subversive and looks clever. In the early 2000 or late 90s, the artists working with games usually modded or hacked commercial games in a kind of purposeful way. And sometimes they will create this enigmatic objects like this one you're seeing here. This is an art installation, but it's also a mod of Unreal Tournament. That was before Unreal was an open engine. You could just like mod the game Unreal. And this works. It's a kind of like a work that is in dialogue with generative art, which is already its own kind of software art genre. And besides, a lot of people are not comfortable with interacting with computers in a museum anyway, so it makes sense to have non-interactive self-playing games in a gallery museum setting. Or check this collection of hacked bowling games that play themselves in perpetuity. This was, I think, at the Whitney Museum, Korean Kanjo, and had like this massive multi-channel installation with a bunch of commercial bowling games, and the games were hacked. They had like the controller had a chip implanted, and so they were playing themselves. They were playing these games and being, I think, very good at it. And it's a cool installation to watch. You can just sit there and spend like 30 minutes. It's a history of bowling games and their representation across different consoles, different eras, different ways that a designer sort of like solved a problem of translating this simple game into a video game. And it makes you think about interfaces and graphics. There's always something going on. So it's very satisfying actually to just look at these self-playing games. So idle games rely on an abstract sense of progress. The artistic self-playing games produce an aesthetic effect. They are compelling because they are unpredictable and rich. So this is a Quake mod that creates music that you're probably not hearing, but that's fine. It's kind of like glitchy music. Each events are kind of like each notes is triggered by events in the game. And it's played between bots. They are bots from Quake. It's like a Quake mod. And the bots are trying to fight in this abstract floaty world. So it's they're kind of like making music, but also negotiating with an absurd landscape they are not programmed to navigate. So this is a more recent one, Ian Chang Emissaries. This is a trilogy of self-playing games. So they are presented as self-playing games. So you're just kind of like sitting there, usually in a gallery. These are museum pieces. And they are agent-based simulations. They have characters. They look very much like games. They are made in Unity. They have, if you're a Unity developer, you will kind of like even recognize some of the quirks of Unity. But they also have like a rich lore and a consistent world. They have a world behind them. Like it's not just like a like a simulation or like a technical demo. You're sort of like sit there and you wonder about the relationship between this creature, their behavior. You're trying to project your your thoughts and your ideas and your interpretation frames into this kind of like rich, always moving worlds. And they're very expressive. The characters are very expressive. This is very different from usually generative artists. Kind of like abstract and a bit cold. This is actually character oriented. Some self-playing games actually found a market outside of the art world. This one, rather popular one, Mountain by David O'Reilly. It shows a mountain. This is actually a time lapse, so it's going like very fast, but it's not meant to look like that fast. It's actually a very slow game that you're sort of like keeping there as a screensaver or some kind of virtual pet. And it shows a mountain, its thoughts, and it accumulates random events, like some objects sort of like crash on the mountain. And it's kind of like an existential Tamagotchi of some sort. And to me, even more interesting, the follow-up, Everything, is a commercially successful game for PlayStation, very ambitious. And to me, it's even more interesting from this perspective because while the game Everything is played in a rather traditional way with a controller, you're sort of like exploring, unlocking bits of dialogue, monologues. It has a self-play mode that kicks in automatically. So if you're not touching the game for a couple of minutes, it starts playing itself. So I like it because it seamlessly moves from a one-player game to a zero-player game and vice versa, from kind of like game to screensaver. And it's not just like a rather new approach, but it's also consistent with the game philosophy because it's all about the centering the human perspective. By the way, in the game, if you've never seen it before, I think I cannot scroll it here. Well, if you've never seen it before, Everything allows you to move your perspective between animals, objects, galaxies, and so on. And it's consistent with the game philosophy, this whole like zero-player game, because it's all about like you're not really the hero, you're not really anybody, you're just a node in an interconnected world. And this world exists before and after you exist, whether you want it or not. And I think it's very effective in this way to have like a self-playing mode. In this game here, another recent game a commercial game called Abzu. This self-play mode is actually an unlockable feature. It's something that you discover at each level. It's meditation mode. And also it allows you to move the camera between different fish species and different objects. So you can sort of like see the world from slightly different perspectives. And it's a very rich world. And it kind of like it's kind of like a relaxing screensaver that you can just like potentially even just keep there, like an aquarium. To me, it's kind of like goes back to the loop of like, this is a digital aquarium, something that occupies the space between a pet and a piece of furniture. And games as aquarium is probably something that we could think about. Drips, this is another a zero-player game that is actually unlike Progress Quest that I showed before. It's actually very richly illustrated, and it plays like an RPG. So it is a kind of like a progress journey, hero's journey, adventure, killing monsters and leveling up and becoming more powerful. But it has like a very satisfying pixel art. It's kind of like a showcase for the author's sort of like pixel art style. It will play in a second. I'm playing the trailer here because it shows two interesting things about drips. This is how the game works. It has yeah, kind of like very detailed pixel art, kind of like generative, I think, generative landscapes and various random encounters. And the trailer is interesting because it's there are two interesting things about drips because it's probably the only self-playing game that directly addresses the attention economy. It's pitched by its creator as a game for people who have no time to play games. So it's like, okay, that's if you're grown up, if you've got shit to do, here's a game for you. You don't have to really play, and it gives you the same satisfaction, the same sense of discovery and progress that normal game has. And it also tries to avoid, the other interesting thing is that it tries to avoid the compulsion loop that Neko Atsume or Farmville have. It's a game that plays in the background over a long period of time, but it's subtitled as an alarm playing game because you can just set an alarm and check your progress. Basically, like you don't have to constantly like maybe I'm missing something. You can just like set an alarm and be like, okay, in a couple of hours you see where your hero is. So it's an efficient background game that really respects your time, unlike many more exploitative patterns. So some self-playing games derive from traditional games and just replace human players with bots. It's just like a self-playing game is a normal game that is just played by artificial intelligences. And some self-playing games actually use the artificial intelligence that is already built in the game, like that artistic musical Quake mod I showed before that was like a battle between bots in an abstract space. A popular one is this one. This is a Twitch sort of experience, a constantly live stream Twitch experience. It's called Salty Bats. Yeah, it's a continuously streamed series of matches that are running on the fighting game engine Mugen, which is a kind of like a homebrew fighting generic fighting game that includes hundreds of characters that are either being ripped from commercial games or created by the community. So you have like tons of characters that can fight against each other, and this is kind of like randomizing the matches. But the game has actually real players too. So the game is played by the AI and kind of like automatically goes on by itself, and the human players are just spectating and bet money. It's fake money, but it is like a betting game, and it has like different rankings, and you can become fake rich and so on. And obviously, like since like in normal betting, you have different chances of winning, and you can make all sorts of speculation about which character is better. And obviously, it's also like an emergent narrative because you can people can in the chat speculate about why this particular character ends up fighting this other character here, and so on. So it's both like a narrative generation and yeah, a betting game. This is another sort of like very different situation. This is the relatively new genre of auto battle or auto chess, and it started as a mod of Dota, and it became its own sort of esports. And the way it works is that players set up their team of creatures in a chessboard-like arena, in a small arena, and just kind of watch them fighting. So it does require attention, and you have players, obviously, and it does require interaction. And if you're playing it seriously, you probably just want to analyze and really paying attention to what's happening. But still, to me, at the conceptual level, it's very similar to a zero-player game, because most of the time it's really not requiring your complete attention. You can sort of like run it in the background. So that's an interesting one that is extremely popular. This is a neural network learning to play Super Mario. It is not a bot in that it's not programmed to behave like a human. It is more of a machine learning application. So it's not like somebody was like, okay, this is Mario and programs all the events. Oh, there is like an obstacle and you have to avoid it. It's not trying to simulate the behavior of a human. It's more like the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, the neural network has access to buttons and knows the state of the game, the state of like see what you as humans see. And it doesn't have like a high level understanding of how the game works, only like an indication of success, like the progress, how far you made it. And so kind of like at the beginning starts playing randomly, and then you sort of like learns that by pressing certain things in certain situation, you sort of it manages to advance. So this is a field of research in artificial intelligence, or better yet, machine learning. That is not different from those AI playing chess or Go. And I think automating play is a fun problem to solve if you're a programmer. But I wonder if it can become another kind of play, a higher level of play, if it can just be democratized and become the new kind of play that instead of just playing your game, you are programming agents that solve the game. AI play games are related to bots and programming. There are some there are some games that kind of like do that, like Core War or Gladiator bots, and or this one here called Scripts, and it's a competitive. Let me see if I can mute it. Oh well, that's fine. It's a competitive real-time strategy game in which you program the behavior of your units. So it basically lets your AI fight against other people's AI unsupervised, while hypothetically when you're sleeping or working or doing other things. So it's one of those like you set it up and let it go type of game. And I like how it has its own business model, right? Like they are selling this game. I don't know, it's like they're making a lot of money, but definitely has a committed community. But it also has its own weird business model because the AI has to run continuously on the cloud. Somebody has to take care of that. Once you program your AI, it still has to fight on somebody's computer. So somebody has to pay for nobody to play. And I like that. There are other competitive games in which you program AIs. There are a popular one is Gladiator Bot, or the assembly game Core War from like 1984, or maybe like even the Conway Game of Life. That was the first cellular automata, the first zero-player game, if you will. It's called Game, but it's really more like a simulation. It's a sandbox simulation that lets you set up a state based on the same kind of rules. And you can play as a kind of game because people have been, throughout the years and decades, this is from 1970, have been discovering emergent combinations and been sharing patterns. So you see some of them that are a bit more interesting than normal, flickering. So it is a kind of like asynchronous, highly asynchronous zero-player game that people still, regardless, play, even when you're not. I think AI and bot programming games are a super niche game right now, also because coding is kind of like a specialized skill. And also, like, to me personally, it feels more like work than play, because I'm also coding, in my in my normal practice. But I can see potentially this game, this genre of bot AI games crossing over with single player programming games. There are many games that, like Fantastic Contraption, 7 Billion Humans, or Factorio, or all the Zachatronics, most of the Zachatronics games, or this one here that I really like, Crescent Loom, that allows you to program essentially behavior. They are games that figure out how to make programming behaviors intuitive and playful and visually appealing. So you're not writing code. In this one, you're creating the muscle system and a nervous system that looks like circuitry. Essentially, you're programming both the brain and the body of these creatures. And I don't know if this is like a multiplayer game. It's more like a sandbox at this point. It's still unreleased, but I can see this being a blueprint for a more like a massively multiplayer kind of zero-player games in which your creatures keep existing in a shared world and perhaps doing things, fighting or doing other things in the world. So here's another one, San Andreas Deer Cam. This is both an artistic mod, because it was made by an artist. It's a bot game and a self-playing game. And it's a mod of GTA 5 that follows a deer. It replaces the main character, but behaves like an NPC deer in the game. And it was left streaming on Twitch. Oh, this is a very short video. It was left streaming on Twitch for months and months and gained a huge following. And it provided like a lot of entertainment because GTA is huge and very emergent in its behavior. So you will see this poor deer getting stuck or messing with other people, blocking traffic or getting chased by cops, because the cops, I think, technically still saw the deer as the criminal, the GTA protagonist, essentially. And it's also like, so it's a very entertaining slapstick piece, but it's also meaningful. The deer is this kind of like nature's trickster that is causing mayhem in the human world. And it brings the attention to a game that is all about cars and crimes. It really surfaces some aspects that might be kind of like invisible or not, relevant about GTA. Like when you're turning, your character into a deer and doing nothing, you still realize that so much of the universe is based on you committing crime and the cops chasing you, right? And it's both poetic and tragic sometimes when you're seeing that people would be actively rooting for the deer to get out of a troubling situation, or it was really quite a cultural event. And because it was this long event on Twitch, it kind of created its own community and its own spectators with its own memes and lore. Which brings me to another point, another kind of zero-player game, or perhaps low-attention kind of game. So game communities without gamers. Streaming, speedrunning, and esports showed us that games can produce communities and culture around games and without the necessity of playing. You can be a gamer or game culture person without ever playing a game if you really want to. And these communities are usually a byproduct, usually something that happens organically around a popular game. A game becomes popular, like auto chess or auto battler, so it becomes an esport, something that people are interested in. It's deep enough that people are finding satisfaction in seeing a high level kind of play and things like that. But my question is, can you design games or situations specifically for that purpose, for the purpose of creating not just an esport, but creating like a community around a product, around your game / event / experiment? And there are some examples of that too. Twitch Plays Pokemon turns this single player Game Boy title into a massively multiplayer experience. You're probably familiar with it. Thousands of players can go on Twitch and input a control in the chat, like left, right, A, B, start, like the matching the buttons of a Game Boy. But they are still controlling one individual game running on the streamer's machine. So they are all like interacting with this one single player game. And the result was this absurd schizophrenic experience. This was the first iteration. It's much different now. And it went on for weeks. They introduced more structured voting system, kind of like a meta game between anarchy and democracy. And eventually the community beat the game, went all the way through the end of the game. Thousands and thousands of people contributed to the beating of this game. And I think Twitch Plays Pokemon might be like the opposite of a game without players, a game with 1,000 of players. But I think it is kind of like a game without players because there are so many operators, so many people interacting that the individual agency is diluted almost to nothing, is reduced almost to nothing. But still, even if your action might not matter that much, might not make a lot of difference, the shared experience, this sort of like long, difficult journey produced its own fandom, its own lore and memes, and so its own sense of belonging. And I think a game can produce a shared meaning even if it's not played, as long as it gives you something to talk about, essentially. And that's also how traditional sports function. Blaseball is this independent game that came out this year, and it's, I think, probably the first game that intentionally tries to create its own culture and its own vernacular. It was presented as, I think, a cultural event rather than a game. But it's basically a fantasy baseball game in which you gain currency by betting on an automated game. It's all very like text-based and has not a lot of description going on, but it's also very modular. And each team and each player has its own stats, so you can try to make educated guesses. Basically, it's baseball, but it's like a very quickly simulated, very abstractly simulated baseball. You can start to make educated guesses, or maybe just rooting for your favorite team for various reasons. Blaseball is actually much more than that. There is like a meta game in which players can modify the rules every season. They can vote on introducing new rules, and it's all like very surreal. It has been getting more and more surreal. New mechanics are added in dialogue with the community, essentially seeing what the community likes and does. So the creators, I think, call it improvisational game development, because they are kind of like constantly tweaking and adding things based on the feedback they get. And there is this whole like sprawling wiki narrating all the season. There are like stories that are being extrapolated from the stats, this number changing, and there's like short text messages. There's a lot of fan art. So even if it's not a visual game, it became a kind of visual game. It kind of like let users, players sort of like imagine much more than what the creators would have imagined. And it's and there's a Discord, a popular Discord in which players exchange opinions and theories about why certain things happen and so on, and kind of like role play as fans and whatever. And it's very inside jokey. It's like if you're not in the community, you don't get what it is, so you don't understand it. I, for example, don't like Blaseball for the same reasons I don't like sports talk. I don't like when people are starting to talk about football here in Pittsburgh. But still, like, I recognize what's going on there. I think we will see more experiments like this in the future, because they provide things like this. They provide all the meaning and sense of belonging of gay culture with a limited investment of attention. So I think they just fit this particular world of low attention economy particularly well. Here's another leap that I'm providing all of you. Asking you to do. So most of the games right now, most of the games ever made are games without players. Games that don't find an audience are games without players. Games that are left unplayed in your Steam library or unreleased games are essentially unplayed games. So there are plenty of games without players, like if you stretch that definition. I myself made quite a lot of games that almost nobody played, and it's fine because I'm an artist. I don't care. I don't depend on income of on selling games. So I'm fine if a game that only becomes a niche kind of thing. But there are two projects that were created with this aspects, that we're a bit more conscious of these aspects. And one is Casual Games for Protesters, which is a collaboration between me and a poet and performer called Harry Giles. And it's a collection of non-digital games to be played during marches, rallies, and demonstrations. They are physical games, kind of like derived from parlor games or acting games that you go to a protest and you can potentially play. And some games were more like poems, like this one on the top. They are asking a lot from the players. We were not really expecting many people to do that, but most of them are actually being actually tested, and they work as games. And I think Casual Games for Protesters has been appreciated a lot as a concept, but it was never really meant to. But it was never. We wanted it to have people playing them, but it would probably never really happen. It was never quite put into practice in the context that we imagined. I don't think many people actually play these games outside of workshops or, you know, like let's try this, like in the context we were thinking, protests, demonstrations. And this is for a variety of reasons that I don't have to talk about it, that has more to do with the nature of protests in the United States. But I'll not get into that. Because to me it's kind of fine, because the project was more of a proposal, was more of a provocation. What if we use games to enrich existing movements instead of just using games to communicate, to do propaganda and such? What if we use game to make activism more entertaining, more engaging, and less formulaic? And I think the vision is still there, whether or not you play these games. You can just read the instruction and imagine these games being played. And to me, it already kind of does something to your, you know, mind or to the world, or at least I hope so. But it's definitely a difficult question to ask. So this is my latest game, I guess, like the most recent one that I released. It's called Rules and Roberts, and it's a simplified D&D that is meant to teach collective decision making. It's a democratic role-playing game, and it specifically teaches parliamentary procedures used by many associations in the United States called Robert's Rules of Orders. And it's kind of like an absurd and pretty awful game to play, but it's a functioning game that it's actually educational. It really teaches you these rules. Basically it's just like, imagine like a more like storytelling type of game that is in a fantasy setting with a more like progressive woke scenarios. And instead of just deciding to take an action, every action that your characters take have to be discussed according to this voting system. Essentially, you have to vote if you want to do something. And so like, this is like a game that more than 4,000 people downloaded. So like people like kind of like are aware of that. Many even paid for it, even if it was, you know, pay what you want. But I'm pretty sure not many actually played it. I think it was just like more appreciated as an idea, as a kind of like a weird cursed artifact to think about. And I'm fine with that as well, because I think you can still make a point. You can still be a fun thing to think about. It might be hard to know what the impact is like of unplayed games. Like, what's the reason to exist of a game that is not played? In the case of, you know, Yoko Ono's poems or like Fluxus games that are mostly unplayable, they can exist as beautiful art objects, like the white chess. It's totally a playable game if you want, but probably not many people played it to conclusion. It's something that it's intentionally breaking down as you're playing it, because it becomes harder to track your pieces, and it can, you know, like make a statement about, you know, like a pacifist statement. It can communicate with the mechanics of chess and with the symbology of chess and with the history of chess. So it is a game. It is a game that uses mechanics. It's not just an object. Here's a quote from Robert Young. He wrote a post a few years ago. So Robert Young, if you don't know him, made several weird gay games that went viral, mostly as videos or animated GIFs. He realized at some point that most people knew about them or heard of them without having played them, which is, you know, a bit of a difficult situation to be as a game designer, because you definitely put a lot of care into making them playable and you know, interesting to interact with, not just as a, you know, a short animated loop. But yeah, but that's what he's saying is like games kind of like came to terms with this. Games are primarily conceptual / performance art. Games are culture, and it's more important to witness a game than to play it. The concept and your explanation of that concept and your audience understanding of it, that is your game. And he also asked, he kind of like made even a step further and asked, what if some games function better in that way, as a cultural hearsay, as something you only hear about? What if you design a game to be hearsay, to not be played, but to be something that you just hear about? And here's one, for example. Jason Rohr, who is you know, a game designer, you know, like a veteran game designer, once made a game meant to be played by somebody 2,000 years in the future. Like somebody, this is a game for someone. It was part of a speculative competition, I think, at GDC. And you were meant to, produce just like a game idea, but he actually created an actual game. He took this prompt as a design problem. What are the components? What are the design constraints of making a game to be played by a distant person, perhaps not even a human, 2,000 years from now, played by an alien or a different civilization. And for example, the game was made in metal that would not degrade over centuries, and the rules were described with diagrams, just in case human civilization disappears or English is forgotten. And it was buried in the middle of the desert. A part of the distribution, I guess, problem it will be like, how do I make sure that this game is potentially being discovered, but not anytime soon? And he buried it in the desert and made it intentionally hard, but not impossible to find. So we have pictures, but it is entirely possible that Jason Rohrer never made a functioning game or never buried it. But it doesn't matter because it tells a story regardless, and it's an interesting story that opens up, like a deep time and deep speculative fiction and what it means to design, I guess, like across culture, across different like language boundaries and things like that. And this takes me to my final kind of games without players, which is imaginary games. So imaginary games, I'm thinking like this series of posts. These are Twitter posts by Pippin Bar. I often post, game ideas on Twitter. Many people do it because everybody has, like a packet full of ideas that they will never have the time or the energy to develop. And game artist and scholar Pippin Bar turned this sort of like sharing game ideas on Twitter into an everyday practice. It's almost like a body of work. He has like hundreds of tweets like that. And many games are more like abstract provocations, but some of them could actually be starting points for actual games. So like some of them are like kind of like jokes almost, or poems, or conceptual instruction pieces. But some of them actually could be the basis or could be elements of a game. And this is not actually the first time that happens. So all games essentially start as imaginary games, right? Because before you have a game, you got some kind of game idea. And occasionally games ideas are picked up by others and become true. And it happened most notoriously by this tweet by the parody account Peter Molleindustria, parody of Peter Molyneux, Lionhead developers, and so on. And a game jam was made in his honor because they were like fun and potentially actually interesting design ideas. And so like the game Donna County by Benjamin Esposito was inspired by this particular tweet that didn't even go viral, actually. It was like 29 retweets, 100 likes. So it wasn't like, a cultural moment, but somebody, this guy, Benjamin, kind of saw something in it. So it was like, okay, this is definitely a gameplay. And so he made Donut County. And even more interestingly, and sadly perhaps, when Donut County was still unreleased, was essentially still an unplayed game, it was ripped off and turned into one of the most successful phone games called Ho.io, which is still like among the top played games in the Apple Store. So, and I think it's much worse and like much less interesting than the original, but still, like it's a popular game, and that starts from an idea that starts from an idea. So imaginary games do exist in the world and do change the world potentially, maybe even more than some actually existing ideas, and that's like a difficult thing to wrap your head around. So I don't just want this talk to be descriptive. Since many of you probably make games, I want to offer something concrete. This is a bit of a summary. I think all these games, these examples, provide ideas for designing games in a saturated attention economy, right? They also open more profound questions about our work as game developers. But I have a checklist for you. Like, here's some question. Kind of like take down some notes. If you're currently making a game, challenge yourself to answer this question in relationship to what you're making. For example, what is your game offering beyond interactivity? From a visual point of view, like can the game function as a visual piece even without interacting it? Can it function conceptually without interaction and gameplay, or like letting it play itself, for example? And can it function socially? Can this be a basis for a community social interaction, even regardless of the interaction? Here's another one. Is your game performable? Basically, like, does your game give the possibility to talk over it or to joke about it? Like, can a streamer riff on it and create their own narratives and their own sort of like little show for their viewers on YouTube or Twitch or whatever? So that's kind of like important. I think that this will become one of the main like key of success. It's already becoming a key of success, especially for smaller independent games. If you think about like Among Us, which is a game that was released and almost nobody paid attention until some streamers picked it up. Some streamer figure out, okay, this is a good streamable game. And I think more and more you will have to, whether or like or not, I don't like streaming culture personally, but whether or you like it or not, you will have to already design with the streaming culture in mind, unfortunately. Can your game be played while doing something else? Yeah. That's another design constraint. Like, can you turn your game into something that is kind of like a background play? Can your game function only as a GIF or as a screenshot or as documentation of some sort, as a video? And if so, are you okay with that? Which is another kind of important thing. I've been making political games that have, like, sometimes elaborate gameplays, but I realized that sometimes people form their opinions on my games just based on a screenshot, and that's a bit of an issue. And sometimes I have to think about what my political games will look like as a screenshot. If they are taken out of context, will they be interpreted as the opposite of what they are? Because I sometimes use dark humor or like really edgy satire or whatever. So can an artificial intelligence play your game better than a human, or as well as a human? And if so, if potentially, theoretically, an AI can play your game, why should a human play it? That's a question for all of you. Like, we are getting to a place in which we have sophisticated machine learning agents that can play games. So why are we making games that can be played by machines? Like, shouldn't we be raising our bar for what a game is, and for the kind of functions in your brain that it activates? Can your game exist in contexts and spaces that are not currently associated to play? I didn't make many examples of this, but think about like all the possible spaces in which games exist, and can you bring them outside? Like Pokemon Go definitely produced that. It was an alternate reality, not because it created an alternate reality, but because it kind of like blended very well with blended very well with the space, and you're running a chore, but you're also playing. And so it's a background game. It's a game that plays without players or focused all the time, but maybe there are other spaces and contexts that nobody has really thought or exploited or extracted time from. Does your game need to be played to function in the world? And more importantly, does your game even need to be implemented to be made into a game in order to function in the world? And this is a question that also asks another question, and what does it mean to function in the world? What do I mean? Well, it depends on what you want to do with your game. And so ultimately the question is, why are you making this game? All right, I'm running out of time, so I will end here. I was hoping to play actually my next Friends game, but it turns out that we cannot really do it with the lag, and besides, there is no time because I only have 5 minutes. So that's it. Thank you very much. Give me a silent applause.
Yeah, I hope you can hear it. Thank you very much, Paolo. Our community was getting very philosophical, actually, and was asking some interesting questions. Maybe you will be available on Discord afterwards?
Yeah.
Sure, great.
For a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much. I think there were plenty of questions you asked yourself, so maybe we got some of them covered at least. But thank you very much for this impulse. I think it was a very interesting topic and something different and something that might be discussion worthy in the future. So thank you very much, and we see you on Discord. For everyone else, the next things up is the Machinima Kino or Kino Cinema. Jeez. So we are watching some Machinimas afterwards, and which some sort of they actually match what we just were talking about. Since we don't have actors, but we have machines acting. So thank you very much, and I hope we'll see you soon. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.